All right, thanks folks for joining. We'll just wait another minute or two here since there's still some other folks filing in, but we'll start shortly. All right, well, it's a couple minutes past. There are still some folks kind of filing in. I'll go ahead and plan to admit them as they come in, but I think we should go ahead and kick it off. So I'll turn it over to you, Pierre.
Okay, great. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Innovation On-Ramp Overview webinar. The presentation, as we get underway, will be probably about 15 to 20 minutes, and we'll have hopefully ample time to answer questions, both kind of throughout and at the conclusion. Hopefully folks can hear me okay. Definitely let us know if you're experiencing any kind of issues on audio or video as I share. Let's see here. And of course, oh, too fast. So by way of introductions, from Silicon Valley Clean Energy, we have Amy Gotway-Bailey. She's the Director of Decarbonization and Grid Innovation. Along with Amy, we have Jessamine Allen, who's the Decarbonization and Grid Innovation Analyst and will be supporting this program as well as the solicitation round. And then myself, Pierre Boll, I'm a Senior Manager managing the Innovation On-Ramp program as a third-party program implementer where we provide support to solicitation applicants as well as awardees in helping to design and implement pilots as they get underway. The agenda for our presentation and Q&A for today, first we'll go over SPCE's decarb strategy and roadmap overview. And then we'll jump into the innovation programs as well as the innovation on-ramp more specifically. And then we'll get into the details for this latest solicitation round and provide an overview of evaluation criteria and application process. And then we'll have time at the end for questions. In terms of logistics, yeah, please use the chat function with Zoom to submit questions throughout, and then we'll kind of queue that up ideally for the conclusion of our presentation. And we are recording the webinar, so when we're finished, we will provide a link to this webinar recording for reviewing afterward. So with this, we'll turn the microphone over to Amy to walk us through SPCE's decarb strategy and programs roadmap.
Okay, great. Thanks, Pierre, and thanks everyone for joining the webinar, both the folks joining live here and also those that end up watching the recording. As Pierre described, I'll go over a bit of background info prior to turning it back over to him. So I mainly want to cover our decarb strategy and programs roadmap, which provides some of the framing for this program. And so this is SVCE's kind of primary strategic document, which was adopted by our board in December of 2018. It is kind of effectively our investment thesis in the community. It sets our community-wide GHG targets and lays out the specific strategies and implementation steps we're pursuing to achieve those targets. So you can get an overview of all of the programs at the link to our website shown here, which also includes a link to the full decarb roadmap. So if you're not already familiar with our decarb roadmap, I would recommend taking a look if you're considering applying. I'll give a few highlights here in the webinar, but there's really a lot more info both on our website and in the decarb roadmap itself that I won't be covering here. Okay, so I just noticed it looks like Kristen's having problems with audio, but it seems like it's fine for other folks. So if there are any other issues that surface, please do let us know. And we'll try to address any audio and technical issues. All right, so I'll keep going here. This chart shows our community-wide emissions. There's a lot happening on this chart, so I'll just focus on a few things. The y-axis, we have annual metric tons of CO2 emissions for our service territory, our 13 communities. And then along the x-axis is the year. And so we have a few historical emissions years now of data. When this chart was created, it was in 2018. And we forecasted our emissions through 2030 based on a variety of different assumptions. But the main takeaway that I want you all to get out of this chart, as you can see, there are three main contributors to our community's emissions: electricity, which is the darker turquoise part of the stacked bar; natural gas from buildings, which is shown in orange here; and then transportation in the lighter blue. And we've done a lot to reduce electricity emissions, both by forming and offering a carbon-free power supply. So the remaining emissions, the largest buckets of emissions, at least remaining at this point, are mainly from natural gas usage in buildings and transportation. Next slide, please. And as outlined in the decarb roadmap, the overarching approach that we're following to achieve decarbonization include these kind of three steps. This is a fairly simplified version of our approach. First, decarbonize electricity. So we've made SVC has made over $1 billion in investments in renewable energy to date. And that's what we're doing on the power supply front. Electrify everything, including specifically transportation and buildings. So those end uses then run off of clean electricity, and then do that in a way such that we're harnessing energy efficiency and enabling grid integration of these new resources. So this approach isn't unique to us. It's a broad kind of scientific consensus on how to feasibly achieve deep decarbonization. And that is the overarching strategy we adopted in our roadmap. Next slide, please. So the specific program areas that we have identified in the roadmap that we're active in are shown here. You'll notice that the first four from left to right are all from the Venn diagram on the last slide, specifically power supply, built environment, mobility, and energy efficiency and grid integration. We do have two additional program areas that are cross-sector. One is education and outreach, and one is innovation. And as Pierre mentioned, SVC is it's a very key strategy and activity for SVC pushing innovation. And so that's really a reflection of the community that we serve here. Next slide, please. So this presentation and this entire program, our Innovation On-Ramp program, is the primary program under that focus area. At a high level, the goals of our innovation programs are to accelerate innovation that we know is needed to achieve our decarbonization mission. And also specifically, we think we can do that best by leveraging our unique position as a community electricity provider in the nation's innovation capital. Next slide, please. So just one other final note that I'd make before turning it back over to Pierre. We talk about innovation a lot at SVCE, and so it's worth asking kind of what do we mean by it? I think many folks may think of gadgets and widgets when we think of innovation. Everyone loves the latest gadgets. And certainly love those, but we're trying to define innovation to be broader than that. So we're referring also to innovation in data services, in policy, in program design, education, cross-sector collaboration. So it's not strictly an emerging tech program that we've developed. It's since we're defining innovation to be broader. And I also wanted to call out the last bullet as well. I think we like to be the first to do things sometimes, but that's not necessary. And sometimes our role is really more to help expand and replicate ideas that have been piloted in other communities by other folks. And so replicating innovation and scaling it from elsewhere is also a key part of what we consider to be within the umbrella of our mandate. All right, I'll turn it back over to you, Pierre.
Okay, thank you, Amy. We did get one hand raised by Rob Means. And, Rob, yeah.
Yeah, I was at first thinking that one of the things we're doing with the Milpitas PRT system, this is Advanced Transit Project, is the governance by creating a taxable but nonprofit mutual benefit corporation. I didn't see immediately on there something about an innovation in terms of how a corporation is structured or run. But it might actually fit under the policy and program design sector. Any comments one way or another on that?
Yeah, thanks very much, Rob, for your question and for bringing that up. I should have mentioned, and I'll edit this slide accordingly later, but this is not intended to be an exhaustive list. And so certainly I think kind of what you're describing, there is a lot of innovation, I think, in kind of types of agencies, how they're governed. And I think we've kind of maybe, elements of that are kind of fall within some of these subcategories, but maybe it, merits its own distinct bullet. But this is certainly not an exhaustive list, and we're looking for innovation just really across the board. And so that's, yeah, thanks very much for bringing up that point.
Okay, great. Well, I will continue and dive more into the Innovation Onramp program. Let's see here, we'll get. So an overview of the Innovation Onramp. The main idea is to provide small grants for innovative pilot projects. Silicon Valley Clean Energy has typically put solicitations out on a semi-annual application cycle. The idea is to provide transparent evaluation criteria, which we'll step through in a moment, as well as provide standardized partnership agreements. And I should note for this particular solicitation round that the partnership agreement will be posted on the website by end of this week or early next week. Also to provide up to 18 months for a maximum term for a given pilot. And then a cap of 5 pilots per application cycle. For the full overview of the Innovation Onramp in terms of the 3 stages, there's this particular cycle, which is represents stage 0, which is actually the first time SVCE has provided a grant application for essentially kind of stage 0 specifically. And this would be anywhere from 5,000 to 20,000 for seed round projects. In prior rounds, SVCE has supported stage 1 and stage 2 for proofs of concept and demonstrations. And those grant sums have typically been a little bit larger, ranging from as small as about 10K to upwards of 100,000 in terms of the broader program. So the overall kind of thesis of the innovation on-ramp is to support scale, kind of from the idea phase, which is really where this particular solicitation round is focused on, this sort of stage 0. And we want to get a lot of great ideas from folks out there, and help folks come up with sort of what risk points are out there, what ideas, kind of what next steps would be in terms of socializing the idea, and to do that type of work, which would then kind of set up for the prototype and commercialization phases. Again, sort of stage 1 and stage 2, further down the line with proofs of concept and for demonstrations. So yeah, again, this is really kind of looking for new ideas out there, and to bring those proposals to SVCE. As I mentioned a couple slides ago, SVCE is very transparent with the evaluation criteria in essentially reviewing and scoring the applications. The primary evaluation really are the 5 criteria here, as well as a 6th, the staff resource impact. But those additional criteria include the customer and community value, the emissions impact, the kind of scalability, transferability of the technology or idea, providing showing kind of how it provides equity in service, and also then a core role for SVCE, which again kind of goes back to the proof of concept and commercialization, which ideally the idea wants to be able to show that scalability and transferability through SVCE. And as I just mentioned, staff resource impact is also a big consideration. SVCE runs a very tight ship, and so the definitely will want to provide, recommend proposers providing, thinking through what that resource impact would be, and to provide that in your application. And then secondary criteria, certainly if there's supportive co-funding from sources, this could be kind of typical sort of in-kind match, through labor or kind of materials brought to the project, but also perhaps if your idea or company or organization has funding from another grant or say other entity, that certainly that work could essentially be kind of cross-listed with SVCE's project. Definitely make that known in your application.
Pierre, if you just go back a couple slides, we had a question come in from Spencer Harrison. What exactly do you mean by staff resource impact? So thanks very much, Spencer, for asking that. In this case, this is referring to SVCE staff, like specifically what would you require of SVCE staff in order for whatever your proposal is for it to succeed. So for instance, some of the pilots that we've carried out with Innovation On-Ramp involve a great deal of staff involvement. Some of them are white labeled, for instance. And so there's significant involvement from our programs team and marketing and outreach teams. Other pilots are more kind of arm's length, in which case the staff burden on SVC is significantly lower. And so that's what we're referring to here. And so I think the kind of key question, as you're formulating a proposal to ask is kind of what would you require from us for it to succeed? And so that's how we would evaluate staff resource impact. So hopefully that answers your question there.
Okay. So with this particular application cycle, the focus is on building decarbonization, and the primary focus then is to seek projects that will complement efforts identified in SVCE's fairly recently released Building Decarb Joint Action Plan. And there's a link and the cover of that report here on the right. In addition, though, the SVCE is still open to proposals, focused on other topics. So it's certainly not only building decarb being the primary focus, but that certainly will be the primary theme for this application round. And a couple other considerations with your proposal. Helpful to kind of note alignment with activities across the program's portfolio. So certainly would encourage folks to look at SVCE's website and programs that are currently being offered, as well as programs that might be kind of coming to the fore later this year, and to think about kind of weaving in those considerations into your proposal. And also, I think it's really important to note that with the funding and what SVCE is looking to get from proposals, that sharing lessons learned with relevant stakeholders is really an important aspect here as well. SVCE is effectively a public-facing community choice aggregation organization. And so in that vein, we'll want to kind of keep much of the learnings kind of out there to share with SVCE stakeholders and folks who are part of SVCE. So definitely take note of this slide with the timeline and due date of March 12th at essentially right before midnight Pacific time. The application round this time includes requiring an accompanying recorded video pitch, and the sort of directions, guidance, and how to essentially upload your video pitch are part of the application package, which is available at SVCE's Innovation Onramp program webpage, which is linked here. And if you have additional questions about the application, please send them to the email address here, innovation@svce or svcleanenergy.org. And those questions will essentially be kind of routed to SVCE as well as myself. And we will look to get as many questions answered as in a quick turnaround as possible. And to then show what the next steps beyond the application cycle. Again, March 12th, the deadline. In mid-March through April, SVCE will be looking to review the proposals and make a selection of finalists. Those selected finalists will be notified, and we'll then move to the next phase of contracting, which will likely span May into June, and anticipate then launching pilots in the June-July timeframe. And with that, that concludes the basics kind of overview here. And I see that we do have a few questions, I think, that have queued up. And we'll look to answer questions folks have.
Great, thanks, Pierre. Would you mind going back to the slide on primary evaluation criteria?
Yeah.
So thanks, Abigail, for your question. I'll go ahead and repeat it here. I have not seen any reference to the needs of disadvantaged, underserved communities. What are you doing to ensure equitable access to projects in underserved communities? Yeah, so that's a great question. And our decarb roadmap, the 5 prioritization criteria that have been adopted that are applied across our entire programs portfolio, not just Innovation On-Ramp, includes equity and service. And I realize we didn't go into in detail each of these different prioritization criteria, but equity and service is really getting at exactly what I think your question is about. How do we best serve kind of traditionally underserved and disadvantaged communities? And so as a part of the application process for you all or anyone who's submitting a proposal for Innovation On-Ramp, we will ask that question to you. How does your proposal help achieve equity and service across our service territory? And so this is a part of the evaluation criteria of how we select pilots. I will say that, for all of these criteria, a lot of how we think about our programs portfolio really is on a portfolio basis. And so it's not the case that every single pilot may address disadvantaged or underserved communities to the same degree. But on a portfolio basis, we want to tackle and provide quality energy and decarbonization services to our entire community. So that's how it kind of fits in here. If there are any other follow-up questions you have on that, Abigail, please let me know. And I saw one other question come in. Spencer, you mentioned the stage 0 will be more of an ideation or idea stage. Does this disqualify any startup that already has a product built that would be ready for a pilot? So the answer to that is no. I think the intent of creating this particular phase is that we found that we had ideas that were not as far along as it sounds like yours might be. And we wanted some mechanism to really kind of take ideas that were generated and began to be incubated at hackathons that we had sponsored and organized and other partnerships, and to bring them to a stage of bring them through the commercialization pipeline to a more intermediate stage. And so that's why we have this funding level and are targeting this part of the pipeline. But that being said, we wouldn't turn away applications if there is a compelling proposal for a pilot that has something that is further along. But this really is intended to be the opportunity to for us to help support ideas that are more in the formative stages. Hopefully that answers your question there. And so I see another one. Can you please provide more explanation on the evaluation criteria related to transferable? And I should have paused and said, Pierre and Jessamine, if you had any other additions to any of my responses, please feel free to jump in. Okay, so the evaluation criteria, transferable and scalable. The idea here is that we want to make sure that whatever innovations that are creating value that we're helping to incubate aren't just relevant for Silicon Valley, because if they aren't relevant for Central Valley or other parts of the US or other parts of the world, then the impact of what we're doing is very limited. And so we do want to support pilots that support our community and provide customer value, which is the first evaluation criteria. But we want to specifically focus on the ones that have the promise to really having an impact well beyond our borders, because that's really what we need to achieve decarbonization. If we focus only on our own emissions, it's just obviously an extremely small fraction of global emissions, given this is a global problem. And so that scalability and transferability is referring to kind of how relevant is this for other CCAs, other parts of the state and the country. Hopefully that provides some insight into that one. But yeah, Pierre and Jessamine, if you had any other additions to any of these answers, please do feel free to chime in.
Yeah, no, I think these are really great responses, Amy. Yeah.
All right, maybe just one follow-up, going back to Spencer, your first question on what exactly do you mean by staff resource impact? I think just one follow-up there that maybe I wasn't very explicit with. The intent would be to minimize it. I know in the past we've had certain pilots that have had more staff involvement, and it's not kind of off the table, but kind of going back to some of Pierre's comments, we're pretty bandwidth constrained at this point in time. And so if your project requires a significant amount from SVC staff, it would be maybe challenging for us to meet that need. And so to the extent that there is a proposal that provides significant customer and community value and meets all of these other evaluation criteria, but minimizes staff resource impact, that's obviously preferred. So I figured I should probably add that clarification to that question.
Okay. Yeah, do folks have any other questions?
Oh, hi, can you hear me? This is Yonda.
Yes.
Your answer to my prior question is very helpful. Thanks. I have another question. Our solution is supported by a prior award, basically CalSeed award. You probably know that. So we've developed a kind of prototype, but we're more considering now how do we take it to the market? How do we support especially existing utility programs for building decarb? So my question is that, for this type of solution, we kind of jump into stage 2 for demonstration without going through your stage 0 and 1. Is it okay? Is it something that, you prefer that, you start with stage 0 and then going up to stage 2? And the second related question, if it's okay, is the kind of the prior award, like the CalSeed award we got, is that considered to be co-funding?
All right. So for your first question, it's not necessary for any applicant to work with SVCE on a stage 0 or stage 1 grant to have a stage 1 or 2 grant respectively. And so I think we can engage with folks as they that are in different parts of kind of the technology readiness pipeline. So if that's your question, yeah, it's not necessary for us to be kind of a part of the full maturation process or commercialization process.
Got it. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and then regarding your second question, if I understood it correctly, you're asking kind of how we defined match funding.
Yes.
And co-funding. Yeah, so that's something that we can provide more guidance on in the FAQ section of Innovation Onramp. And so why don't I advise you to kind of check the website in about a week with some kind of written guidance on that. But the idea of the match funding is that it is devoted specifically to the project with SVCE. And so if it's a grant that's already been received and it's already been basically spent to develop a product or service, that's great. Actually, some of our prior Innovation On-Ramp awardees have had CEC grants, DOE grants to build products that we ended up deploying, but that wouldn't count as match funding for the pilot in that case.
Got it. Thanks.
Okay, then I see another question from Spencer. When will stage 1 and 2 applications be open? Right, so for stage 1 and 2 applications, the plan is to release a solicitation for stage 1 and stage 2 in the fall of this year. So that's the tentative plan. It is, potentially subject to change, but that's what we're shooting for. Pierre, would you mind going to the slide that has the email? Just so folks know, if you have, oops, oh, sorry, if you go 2 up, I should have been more specific. Yeah, so if you have any, it looks like we do have some more questions coming in, but if there are questions, after this webinar, as there may be, the email address shown here in the 4th bullet point, innovation@svcleanenergy.org, is monitored, and we can respond to questions that come in after this webinar. Okay, so I see a couple more come in. Does getting into stage 0 help with moving forward with stage 1 or 2? So I would say that, well, this is the first time that we've had a stage 0, so we kind of haven't been around like long enough where we've had repeat applications, just because this program has been running for a couple years and a lot of our initial pilots are still running now. But I would say the purpose of providing multiple stages of funding is to allow for that opportunity. If the results of the stage 0 projects are promising, and we carry out evaluation, measurement, and verification of our pilots. And so if it's a successful pilot, then I would expect to be a very competitive later stage proposal, stage 1 or 2 proposal. And then we have one other question. In any education and outreach or stakeholder engagement, must the project proposal limit its engagement to only SVCE territory, or can it allow participation by SVCE territory and other adjacent Bay Area territories? I think a proposal can certainly allow for broader participation beyond SVCE. But certainly the funding that we have through Innovation On-Ramp, the intent is for that funding to provide benefit for our customers and community. And so I would imagine there could be some balance there. And so if that helps answer your question. I guess it depends on how much of the grant is intended to be relevant beyond SVCE versus only SVCE. So we're kind of, there are a little bit of competing priorities, I guess, for the prioritization criteria. One being our customer and community value, but at the same time, we want it to be transferable and scalable. So there is a little bit of a balance there. But yeah, it can certainly include other Bay Area territories. All right, well, if we don't have any other questions, folks can certainly submit questions to the email address on the slide. Are there any other closing comments, Pierre, that you had, or any final questions that folks wanted to ask?
Yeah, I'll just say, yeah, thanks, folks, for participating in this morning's webinar. Again, we'll provide the recording at the webpage here with svcleanenergy.org/innovation. And then again, for additional follow-up questions that you might have, yeah, please do send those questions to innovation@svcleanenergy.org. And yeah,
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, sorry.
appreciate it. No, yeah, thank you, Amy and Jasmine, and yeah, thanks everyone for joining. And yeah, look forward to seeing exciting proposals coming in by March 12th.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Great. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.